Hello, welcome to the program. I'm your host, Ron Whitlock, and we have with us today folks who know about politics because they talk politics amongst themselves. One of them is the Professor Emeritus of Political Science, UTB-TSC, Tony Knopp. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you for being with us on Ron Whitlock Reports. And his traveling compadre, Bill Harris, who is the Chief of the English Department and Chairman of that department at University of Texas, Brownsville, also co-located with Texas Southmost College. Bill, thank you for coming and being with us on the program. Now, we're going to be talking to you today and discussing amongst ourselves the presidential election cycle that we're all involved with. You're seeing all of these campaign commercials, Barack Obama this, John McCain that. But we're going to discuss a little bit with you today the importance of the internet in this presidential age, the lack of less importance of the newspaper involvement in the campaigns because their circulations are falling off all across the nation. Tony, what's going on? Is the internet going to be the most important element, even maybe coming close to the importance of television, God forbid, in this election cycle?
Something for you to worry
Something
about.
To worry about. Well, we're on the internet, so we're covered there at ronwhitlock.com.
Got the plug in.
Got the plug in.
I don't know that it's going to reach the importance that television has yet, but it's becoming rapidly much more important, particularly the role of blogs, as more and more people are able to reach a wider audience and a larger expression of differing points of view.
Thousands and thousands of communities, Bill, certainly among your students that you see at the University of Texas, Brownsville, they have the opportunity now to become engaged politically for the first time with a medium that they really dominate.
I think one of the things, too, that kind of feeds into this in sort of a symbiotic relationship is the business with the the growth of cable news and talk radio. And you put all of that in, and it kind of feeds into what's going on the internet. And they sort of, I think, a kind of an energy emerges from that particular dynamic. And I see it in my students. I'll hear them, even when they don't agree with someone on one particular show or another, they'll be talking about that, and then they'll get on the internet and talk about it with their friends, and you just see things kind of mushrooming, growing from that.
Isn't this a good thing to have the young people, the future of our nation, involved, engaged in the political process, Tony?
Well, I was just thinking about when Bill was saying this, you may be inciting the elements that are more in the more of extreme areas of the political spectrum. In other words, they may reinforce each other with cable news programs that are one-sided, and then you get the bloggers who reinforce that kind of thing. That could be a little bit of a problem if it becomes more conflicted, if the political system becomes more conflicted. At the same time, clearly it's desirable to see the younger people getting involved or interested in what's going on, but I'm afraid that it kind of disperse itself too widely into the nether regions of politics and thus make it more difficult for us to come together, so to speak, in order to resolve problems.
It'll play into that lack of civility you hear people talking about in both of the campaigns.
Because blogs historically are not civil in a lot of cases.
Sorry, we need to make the point. Obviously, the people that are blogging have a point of view. They have something to say, and often it's a very strong opinion on one side or another.
But it's like they have the ability to be outside of themselves when they become that blogger individual. They don't necessarily have to follow any of the profiles of what mom and dad and their priest and others expected of them.
Clearly not. They're on their own on the blog.
When you're making those kinds of remarks on a blog or on the internet, you don't have a face-to-face conversation going. You don't get to see what you might have done to that person by that wild remark you just made about whoever. And I think that plays into it, too. It makes it a whole lot easier to be extreme.
So what does all this mean for the future of our country, for this election November the 4th for President of the United States between Barack Obama and John McCain?
Well, for the future of the country, one of the complaints and concerns has been lately that we're becoming too ideological, too much within the politics today and within the government, in Congress, for example, that the Democrats are pretty much all liberals and the Republicans are pretty much all conservatives. And again, my point of it making it more difficult to come together to reach a common ground on resolving issues.
So you're saying that perhaps this superhighway that that Vice President Gore said he helped create.
It's a bifurcated superhighway.
But all of these votes, down to 500 in Florida, the closeness of the U.S. Senate, all of this really does kind of indicate there's a problem in our country.
Well,
or is it a problem being so close all the time?
That created some real problems in the 2000 election. The Democrats continued to believe, long after the New York Times went in and studied the results of that election, continued to believe that it had been stolen from Al Gore. Well, that's not healthy to have that kind of an atmosphere going on in our civil society.
And then settled by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, settled by the Supreme Court, and a belief that the Supreme Court was controlled by conservatives. This was very difficult, I think, for a lot of people. And that kind of atmosphere is not conducive to resolving problems.
What was the reaction of your students, Bill, and your students at the time, Tony, at that point in time when the election was decided by the Supreme Court? What was those students telling you then, and what are they telling you now that they have been so engaged in this campaign?
Well, most of our students weren't telling us much of anything. A lot of students were not, frankly, very terribly interested. I think that they might have preferred one candidate over another, but as to the esoterics of the struggle over who won what in Florida, no, not a whole lot of interest. There were a handful, and it's the same students that you see involved in issues like the border wall, yes, for example, today. They're interested, they were concerned and outraged by one side or the other, but a relatively small percentage, I'm afraid.
So the dynamics of 80-20 were in play then, because the 20% being the leadership, and they're going to tell the other 80 how they need to think and who they need to vote for.
Well, I don't think that they reached the other 80%.
The 80 wasn't listening.
Right.
Okay, so now let's transition to this campaign, with especially the Obama supporters and contributors being so involved in the internet, the blogs, and contributing to the Obama campaign.
Well, it's brought in the big bucks for Obama. There's no question of that. And when you contribute, that's a sense of commitment that you've got. You put your money where your mouth is, in essence. And not only that, but it looks like he will be able to raise, obviously, the kind of funds he thinks he's going to need to overcome what McCain is going to get from the government. McCain has taken the government funding for the post-convention campaign. Obama declined it, but Obama must have done that knowing that he could raise the amount of money that McCain would raise and more. That's why he did it.
Yeah, Obama has shown a technological savvy that's impressive, particularly to younger voters and to new voters as they look at this. And it's one of the ways that he managed to get himself past the really impressive machine that the Clintons had built up. I mean, that was no easy that's quite a remarkable accomplishment to defeat that machine as he did. And I think a very large part of that is a direct result of his knowledge and his understanding of blogs. And his understanding of technology and the internet and how you can reach past some of the obstacles that were traditionally thrown in your way and make some direct connections, or people at least feel that they're direct connections.
Gentlemen, Hillary Clinton did not set up an online manner of contributing to her campaign until late February. And by then, wasn't it too late?
Clearly a mistake, I think, to not have done that early on. Certainly she was aware, and I think it was her campaign people that let her down there. That was their job to get that set up.
But Howard Dean showed the nation how important the internet was.
Clearly.
How long ago?
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, pride pride can blind you to some things, and my guess would be that in the Clinton campaign, they had a pretty good sense of entitlement going in. We're going to be the nominees, and that's the way it's going to be. I think this whole thing just kind of, to them, it was like a tsunami just coming down on them from out of the blue. Where did all of this come? Where did this guy emerge from? I think it was that big a surprise for him.
But over the generations, if the party had always elected the candidate, the party had elected the winner, it had always been a matter of the party-empowered situation. And now this was the tsunami, this particular election cycle, right, Tony?
Well, it's much harder for the party to control things than it used to be. And the party insiders were not able to control it in this run-up to the nomination. Obama clearly had an energy that developed, an energy and a charisma that captured the attention of the people, partly through the internet, but I think also just an energy that got through to the important people, the beautiful people, the Hollywood people, and others, and generated an enthusiasm that carried him past the presumptive, back then,
yes,
presumptive nominee Hillary Clinton.
This despite the superdelegate advantage, which should have been a lock for Clinton. That should have done it. It should have sealed it right there. I think she thought the same thing, and she has to have been enormously surprised when the defections began.
Mm-hmm. So you think the campaign staff of Hillary Clinton may have been arrogant in that particular regard?
Oh, I think certainly.
I agree.
Yeah.
Many pundits seem to blame also Bill Clinton as a secondary element of that. President Bill Clinton going out on the stump and saying things that were not on message.
Well, once again, there was that feeling of entitlement, I think, and the idea that it would be nice to have this young black man run against Hillary in some of the primaries, and he may be something for the future to look at, but he's supposed to fade away, and he didn't. And I think then Bill began to make some statements and take some stands, campaigning for Hillary, that seemed hostile to Obama, that were not acceptable, I guess you put it that way.
I think also Bill had a part of the sense of entitlement that plays in with Bill is a sense that he was a good speaker. And he charmed a lot of people, and people are always talking about his charm. And here comes this charismatic.
My generation.
Here comes this charismatic character out of nowhere, who is rhetorically speaking, Obama is just very effective. You put him on a stage and you let him go with his prepared script and with the things that he needs, and he gives one heck of a speech that certainly rivals anything Clinton ever did in his life. And I think that probably irritated him. Sort of a grand old man who's not anymore.
There were many who saw that as a great team to reoccupy the White House because things weren't all that bad. That's their opinion. Also, Hillary not being a traditional First Lady, 8 years First Lady of the state of Arkansas, then 8 years as First Lady of the United States, not being a traditional First Lady, she was obviously paying attention to policy, how things work, and then having the former President of the United States for 8 years there with you in the White House would not have been bad based on the people who were behind her and her supporters.
Certainly that she seemed to have that's what she was running on, was the experience. Not only what you cite, but also about 6 years as senator, well, more than that, about 8 years as senator. So she had gone out in her own right and had won elections, so she had a good case to make.
But again, this is in a manner of speaking, it's preaching to the choir. She has a good case to make on her particular side, within the Democratic Party. I don't think a lot of Republicans were buying into any of the experience, well, much of the experience, and some of the other aspects of that.
Do you think, fellas, we'll ever see another candidate run for office and not understand the importance of the Internet?
Well, not unless something more than the Internet emerges. Clearly, this is a very important aspect of political life now, the Internet. And you were pointing out the diminishing influence of newspapers because of the declines in circulation. A very disturbing phenomenon. It seems to indicate that we're willing to read some things on some venues, but not in others. It's changing fast. Campaign committees are going to have to be alert to these emerging trends.
I think too often there's a sense of denial It's like, well, we can look at what the New York Times said, or look at what the Wall Street Journal said, and that's very effective, I think, with reaching a certain audience of a certain age. But you reach a younger group of people, and they're just not all that impressed with what the New York Times said or what the Wall Street Journal had to say. Times are changing.
We're all coming up on the conventions of the GOP, the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party. Coming up, are conventions relevant anymore?
They're relevant to the extent that this is a public relations opportunity. They're going to get an hour, maybe a little bit more some nights during that week of the convention. Ron, I'm sure you remember back in the 50s and 60s, it was gavel-to-gavel coverage, people wandering around on the floor there and somebody talking there, and the cameras were on it the whole time. Now,
very exciting. Nail biting.
And it actually was sometimes.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Because the decision was being made at the convention who was going to be the standard bearer for that party.
That's right. But now you get some prime time, and the whole thing is choreographed to take the best advantage of that hour or maybe couple of hours, and that's when you want your most dynamic speakers. That's how Obama got to where he is in the first place. He made a dynamic speech in prime time at a political convention. It captivated the viewers and pushed him to the forefront in the Democratic Party.
Fellows, the people of the United States in their election history over the last 24 months seem to be saying that they want people who are beholden to them and not the party. Do you seem to see the same that I seem to be seeing? And is this going to see a diminishing responsibility and diminishing opportunity for the parties to control the election process?
This has been happening steadily for a few decades now, actually, a diminution of the power of the political parties to control the political situation. I think the likely nomination of John McCain is a good example of that. Here's a maverick person who had challenged some of the mores of his party and now is in position to actually get the nomination of that party because he was able to reach people beyond the party establishment. And he's managed to get that far.
And the party establishment with superdelegates, they thought they had the ability to control that electorate that they had not been pleased with in the past when some candidates who had not won, and they felt the voters stupidly had put them on the ballot.
Exactly. Same thing with the Democratic Party. Here's as Bill was indicating, the superdelegates all pretty much ready to go for Hillary, and along came Obama with this populism appeal, and that made the difference.
Had either party really been listening, Ralph Nader's been saying this for a while. The growth of parties like his, of the libertarian movement, and the sorts of things that kind of the splinter groups, which is one of the more, it's both an encouraging, in some respects, it's an encouraging feature of what's happening. In other respects, it's a profoundly frightening. It's like I would liken it to the breakup of the old Cold War, where you had on one side the Soviet Union, on the other side, or the United States and our guys, and we're just confronting each other. It seemed a simpler world. But as that's sort of fractured, and now we're talking about Georgia, and we're talking about all of these smaller states and terrorism and that sort of thing, you're seeing the same thing with the political parties. It used to be Republicans and Democrats, and you kind of figure that out from there. Well, you can't do that anymore. It won't work with the blogosphere and with the internet and with the rest of these things. And it worries me because it strikes me that it opens up greater possibilities for an even greater fragmentation in American politics, a balkanization that's pronounced, and many people have commented on it. I see it growing, and that frightens me.
I don't know that I want to carry quite too far on this, because the elections are still going to be held within the confines of the Republican and the Democratic Party. Third party elements have not been successful. There's no evidence of any of them coming to the fore at this point. And so within the limits of what we've been talking about, the two parties are still in charge. But the party apparatus is not able to control things as much as they had in the past.
We've only had one independently elected governor in recent memory, and everyone thought maybe that was going to be the beginning of an independent movement within the nation, but that did not materialize.
No, although I don't think you could write off Jesse Ventura's governorship as a complete fiasco or anything. It was not such that it would cause other people to try to imitate it. There were a couple of people who ran here in Texas for governor as independents and didn't come close.
They sort of, getting back to what we were talking about just a moment ago with the party's apparatus kind of it bothers me that it seems as though both parties would like to claim they're big tents with many, many disparate groups that might otherwise have formed political parties of their own, but they try to bring them in. They try to use a kind of an inclusive procedure. But it seems to me that increasingly the tent's on fire. That you've got people on the right in the Republican Party that won't speak to people on the left in the Republican Party, and you have the same thing going on in the Democratic Party, kind of all over the map, and that's what I was concerned about. Not so much them going outside of the parties, but the parties themselves fracturing. I don't think the danger is a danger that's inheres in other parties arising outside of them. I think that the danger is in the parties themselves splintering. I think we might see some of that happen at the Democratic Convention. I might actually be looking forward to it.
What are both parties going to look like after this election cycle, November 4th, when we go to the polls? Are both parties going to look different than they did going into this election cycle?
I think it would depend on the outcome of the election to this extent. If it's a reasonably close election, I don't think I'm going to see a tremendous transformation of either party. Of course, if one candidate were to wipe out the other, then the party that is defeated, such as the Republican Party back in 1964, the Democrats in 1972, you're going to see a restructuring going on within the party. They have to take a look at themselves and say, what did we do? Where are we going wrong here to be defeated that badly? But if it's fairly competitive, as I expect it will be, I don't expect to see a great deal of change within the parties at this time. The Republicans are probably going to suffer a defeat in their candidates for Congress. They may lose some more additional seats, and they're going to have to think for themselves about what are we going to do to get back on track. Beyond that, though, I don't see any real restructuring taking place.
Tony Dobb,
Ron?
Bill Harris, thank you for joining us here at the Round Table on Ron Whitlock Reports. Thank you for joining us. Till next time, adios.